back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to move quickly through a couple different questions. We established earlier credibility matters, certainly for witnesses who appear before us. Mr. Boyle, do you know who Kash Patel is?
I do.
Have you received any money from Kash Patel or his organization?
I have.
When you previously met with the majority members and/or majority staff of this committee, was Kash Patel present for that meeting?
No.
To your knowledge, has Kash Patel ever spoken to the committee members on your behalf?
Not that I know of.
Not that you know of. Was anyone present for your previous meetings with committee members and staff on the majority that were not members of this committee or staff of this committee?
My counsel.
Your counsel? Anyone else?
I don't think so. No.
Is Kash Patel helping you finance your counsel?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Mr. Friend, what about you? Do you know Kash Patel as well?
Yes.
And did you receive any money from Kash Patel?
Yes, he gave me a donation last November.
A donation?
Yes.
Are you a charitable organization?
I was an unpaid, indefinitely suspended man trying to feed his family, and he reached out to me and said he wanted to give me a donation.
Did he have any, was he present for any of your meetings with committee members or staff?
No.
And how many times did you meet with the committee members or staff prior to your transcribed interview?
I never met with them prior to my transcript.
Did you speak to them on the phone?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so you spoke to them on the phone.
Yes, I spoke to them on the phone, corresponded.
Did you provide documents?
Yes, I gave them my written declaration.
Did they ask you whether they could share that with the minority?
I don't know. At the time, I don't believe they were actually in the majority.
Did they ask you whether they could share the documents?
I don't remember if they did or didn't.
I want to focus a little bit on that SWAT case that you mentioned, Mr. Friend, where the SWAT team was used to make an arrest of someone associated with the domestic violent extremist group. That was not your case?
That was a case that was within my office. The Joint Terrorism Task Force sort of ran all the cases together.
Okay. Well, did you work on that case?
My name is on it. I did not perform work for it.
Got it. And what evidence did you have that this defendant had offered to surrender to the FBI?
The evidence I had was in his conversations with the individuals from my office who he spoke to. He said that he would cooperate.
So he said he would cooperate with the FBI, but he never told you that he would surrender to an arrest. Those are two different things, you agree, right?
No, I wouldn't. If somebody told me that if you need anything from me, just let me know, I'll cooperate, I would interpret that to mean I could reach out to them if I had a criminal charge.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. All right, that's certainly not my experience. Mr. Allen, you passed around information to other members of the FBI related to January 6th, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you were admonished by your supervisor not to do that, is that right?
I was not, sir.
You were not. So when it says here in the FBI's letter to Mr. Jorman of yesterday that your supervisor admonished you to stop circulating these materials on multiple occasions, you're saying right now that the FBI is lying to this committee?
That statement that they wrote is inaccurate.
Okay. Did you write to your colleagues to, quote, exercise extreme caution and discretion in pursuit of any investigative inquiries or leads pertaining to the events of January 6th?
Yes, I corresponded with my teammate.
Did you write that?
Yes, I wrote those words in the correspondence.
And that was after you had been admonished not to send information about January 6th, right?
I was not admonished to not send information.
But you do agree that your personal opinion should not influence your official duties, don't you?
No, you should be objective and analytical in all the decisions and information.
No, that was my question. Your personal views should not influence your official duties.
No, you should be objective in doing the conduct of your job.
And now, Mr. Friend and Mr. O'Boyle, I don't have much time, but you agree that you were field agents, correct?
Correct.
And you understand chain of command, do you not, Mr. O'Boyle?
I do.
Right. So that if you make a suggestion to a supervisor and your supervisor overrules you, That's the nature of the business, isn't it?
Not if it's a violation of a law or
And
a
you
rule.
make decisions about whether grand jury subpoenas should be served or not as a field agent of the FBI?
Time the gentleman is
If I have a
expired.
reasonable belief, I can make a protected disclosure, which is what I've done.
Okay, but do you think you make those
Time of the
decisions?
gentleman is expired. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes himself. Mr. O'Boyle, why do you think they came down on you so darn hard? Deep down, what do you think their motivation is?
I think they want to, the agency as a whole wants to get rid of people who simply just don't toe the line that they want. They don't want critical thinkers. They don't want people who raise valid questions to their chain of command.
They want to send a message, don't they?
Absolutely.
They want to make you an example, don't they?
Yes.
And they don't care. They want to send that message so hard, so strong, they don't care that you served 6 years in the Army, member of the 101st Airborne, took enemy fire, was selected for a special new unit they were putting in Quantico. They wanted to send such a message that they said, if we can get this guy, we can get this guy to be quiet, we can get everybody to be quiet. That's what they were doing, wasn't it?
Yes, sir, especially since I just had a baby who was 2 weeks old, and we had just sold our house.
Just to put the emphasis on it, they said, we're going to do it the day he arrives. The day we've worked with him, we selected him, he's done a great job in the FBI, he served our country, took an oath to the Constitution, took an oath to defend this country. He's going to move, we're going to send all his stuff in this van to this moving. We're going to do that. When the day he arrives, we're going to suspend him. We're not going to let his family get their belongings. We're not going to let him get his clothes for his kids, his winter coats for his children. We're going to send a message. And they did. They suspended you. They took your pay. They don't let you get health insurance. They made life miserable for you to send a message. Because you know what? You reported on the first big screw up they had in this administration. The first big one. You reported to us as a whistleblower about the school board's issue. The Biden administration, they thought this was going to be a win for them politically. They thought it was going to make Terry McAuliffe governor of Virginia. Backfired on him. And you reported. Would it surprise you, Mr. O'Boyle, to know that the FBI told us they looked at 25 parents who were reported on this snitch line that was set up with this memorandum from the Attorney General? They looked at 25 parents. How many do you think of them were actually ever investigated and prosecuted? How many think were prosecuted, Mr. O'Boyle?
If I had to guess, I'd say 0.
0. 0. And you came to us because you say this is wrong. This is wrong to set up some federal snitch line, some neighbor calling in because they don't like their neighbor's politics, reporting to the FBI, go investigate these parents. They said, we got to get this guy. We got to get Garrett O'Boyle because you had the courage to step forward. And it's not just with this issue, because we have the memorandum from the Richmond field office about Catholics, right? If you're pro-life, pro-family, and you're Catholic, look out. The FBI wanted to put people inside the church, inside the parish, to spy on fellow citizens. Does that surprise you, Mr. O'Boyle, that that actually happened in the Richmond field office?
It doesn't, not anymore.
Scary. And you know that memorandum, by the way? It was signed off by 5 people in that office. One of them was the chief division counsel, a lawyer who supposedly went to law school and probably had a course on the Constitution, signed off on that memorandum. Scary stuff. Scary stuff. Mr. Allen, you served 20 years. You had a security clearance for 20 years. You served our country as well, right?
Yes, sir.
Honorably discharged.
Yes, sir.
Won medals from the Marine Corps.
Yes, sir.
And they came after you too, didn't they? And you simply did. Mr. Goldman just asked you a few questions. You were simply doing your job. Your job as an analyst is to compile information, open source information, present that to your colleagues so they're fully informed about the case. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you did that job, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
You followed your oath, right?
Yes, sir.
You adhered to the rule of law.
Correct, sir.
You were consistent with the Constitution, just like the oath you took when you signed both as serve our country in the military and at the FBI.
Yes, sir.
And you did the same thing, didn't you, Mr. Friend?
Yes, sir.
And yet you felt the full weight of the federal government come down on you guys. And of course, they timed it perfectly. They sent a letter to us yesterday. We knew they would. We knew it was going to happen that way. And as Mr. Boyle said earlier, he's getting his hearing tomorrow, right, Mr. Boyle?
That's when they tried to schedule it. We've not heard back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your service to the country. Mr. Bishop was right. The poise, the way you've handled yourself, the gentleman way you've handled yourself here, the way you've served our country, it does not go unnoticed. The American people appreciate what you've done for our country and what you are doing for our country. God bless you. I yield back. Now recognize the ranking member of the Virgin Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At least you got a document.
Flaherty, and you said we should ask them, and we're going to. That's why we sent them a subpoena this morning. We want them to come in and answer these questions about why the White House was attempting to censor American speech. With that, I recognize the gentleman from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleagues and friends from North Carolina and Florida are asking why we are talking about Donald Trump. The answer is because this subcommittee is called the Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government. And because of that, the only evidence that we have here in front of us today about the weaponization of the federal government is from Ms. Troy, who has outlined in detail, and I'm sure she has more detail, how Donald Trump weaponized the federal government against his enemies and for his own political interests, and how he intends to do it again. So if we really want to talk about the weaponization of the federal government, we should talk about it, and that's Donald Trump. That's not this grand, crazy conspiracy of how the administration has utilized the social media companies against whom the First Amendment does not apply in order to suppress speech. This is actually the second hearing, I guess our quarterly hearing now, on the Twitter files with the same witnesses that we had. In the first hearing, I asked Chairman Jordan if he could identify any evidence of the government under the Biden administration actually censoring anyone through the social media companies. He pointed out to me an email on January 22nd from Clark Humphrey to flag a tweet that was from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as evidence. The problem was, and the chairman did not acknowledge this, the tweet was never taken down. How can you have censorship if the tweet was not taken down? And since March 9th, that hearing, this committee has had 29 witnesses.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will not, only just because I have a bunch. You're the chairman, so I'm sure you'll respond after me. The 29 witnesses have testified, and every single one testified that the government never coerced, pressured, or threatened any social media company to remove any content. Mr. Taibbi, I introduced a letter that I led to X. Let's call it X now. That way we can know the difference between when Elon Musk took it over and before when it was Twitter. From November 21st. Have you read this?
No.
Well, do you think it would be problematic if X leaves up terrorist violence and propaganda in violation of the terms of service?
Terrorist violence or terrorist propaganda?
If it violates their terms of service, is it problematic?
Well, it depends on what the content is, but they're a private company. They can do what they want with the content.
Aha! They're a private company and they can do what they want with the content. Do you think it's problematic that X would profit off of terrorist violence propaganda and content on their social media platform?
Well, first of all, just to go back to
No, just answer the question. I don't have time. Do you think it's a problem if they profit off of it?
Well, if the company makes money doing what it does, I don't necessarily see a problem with that.
Okay, interesting. So let me just move on, because you said the biggest concern, sir, I'm sorry, you said the biggest concern that you had from the Twitter files was the systematic flags for social media companies. Now, that Stanford EIP that you're talking about, I'm sure you are aware, has documented that the social media platforms to whom they flagged potentially problematic tweets took action on only 35% of them, and only 13% of them were removed. Mr. Schellenberger, you said the biggest problem, and let me just ask you, Mr. Taibbi, real briefly, you would agree that these flags, that the systematic flags that you saw were flags for a violation of the terms of service of the social media company, is that right?
Sometimes, but sometimes in the case of the instances like Congressman Massey, they were actually true information.
Well, that may be the case, but the flag was for a violation of the terms of service.
It's for their interpretation of a violation.
And then the social media company has to determine whether or not it is actually a violation of their terms of service. And in 87% of those flags, they were not removed. Mr. Schellenberger, in brief time, you said that the censorship, the biggest problem you have is the censorship that you talk about is election interference. Do you agree that Russia used social media, including Twitter, to interfere in the 2016 presidential election?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, we've also briefly, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just have the extra time that my colleagues have had. You've talked about the Hunter Biden laptop and how the FBI knew it existed. You are aware, of course, that the laptop, so to speak, that was published in the New York Post was actually a hard drive that the New York Post admitted here was not authenticated as real. It was not the laptop the FBI had. You're aware of that, right?
It was the same contents.
How do you know?
Because it's the same, I mean, it's.
You would have to
CBS News
authenticate it to know it
it's
was the same
contents.
contents. You have no idea. You know hard drives can be manipulated.
Are you suggesting the New York Post could participate in a conspiracy to construct the contents of the Hunter Biden laptop?
No, sir. The problem is that hard drives can be manipulated by Rudy Giuliani or Russia.
But what's the evidence that happened?
Well, there is actual evidence of it, but the point is it's
There's
not
no
the same
evidence for
thing.
it, so you're engaging in a conspiracy
I'm glad
theory.
you agree with me, Mr. Schellenberger, that transparency is the most important thing. And my last question for you is, do you think it would be transparent if Hunter Biden came to this Congress and testified in a public hearing, and more transparent than if he testified privately?
I mean, literally, I've never thought about that. I have no idea.
You don't
I've
know?
literally never thought about
Is
that.
public testimony more
I mean, this is
transparent than
random
private testimony?
hour here. Are you familiar with the First
Mr.
Amendment?
Chairman, I
It
yield
says that
back.
the Congress shall take no action to abridge freedom of speech.
Yeah,
And that's what you just described.
Mr. Schellenberger, is 13% censorship still censorship?
Absolutely.
And the other 87% is what we call the chilling effect that the courts have long recognized that they engaged in. That is the problem.
There's a broad, by the way, part of the operation, Congressman
Holy
Goldman,
cow.
part of the operation was to change the terms of service. So you see them constantly trying to change the terms of service. You see them, it was 35% of the URLs that were, this is according to EIP, were labeled removed or soft blocked. That's all forms of censorship. That censorship is not just removal.
But 65% were not. So how can the government be so coercive?
Does the
that
First
they were-
Amendment
I think
say
that's
that the
about par
government
for the
can
course
only-
on government
Does the First
efficiency?
Amendment say the government can censor 35%?
Time of the gentleman has
They're not
expired.
censoring. They're flagging in the social
Chair
media companies.
recognizes
So
the
Under
chair-
coercion.
35% of a First
Chair-
Amendment, or?
Chair
It's not the
recognizes-
First Amendment. It's the terms of service, as you said, and they are flagging it for the social media companies to make their own decisions. That is not the First Amendment. That is the terms of service.
We have just seen the
Congressman, you're an attorney. You know that 4 federal judges have already ruled that.
And I know that it's on appeal in front of the Supreme Court right now.
that debate was very constructive.
that was
I
fun.
think that got to the heart of the issue. That's the problem right there.
That's-
The
that-
gentlelady
that's
from
right.
Wyoming is recognized for 5.